Okay, let's continue. I want to go back to coupling in time, coupling in space, because there is some confusion about that. Coupling in time, to a certain extent I'll be repeating myself. Coupling in time means that the two communicating processes have to be up and running at the same time. Okay? That's coupling in time. Coupling in space, which is actually a really nasty word, is actually referential coupling, meaning that the two communicating entities, processes, need to know each other's address. Okay? They need to know where to send their messages to. So that's coupling in time, coupling in space. Decoupling in time means that you do not need to be up and running at the same time. Decoupling in space means that you do not need to know each other's address. Okay? To give you an example, email. Email is coupled in space because you need to know the address of the recipient, but it is decoupled in time. Got it? Yes?
However, with the use of aliases and mailing lists and stuff like that,
And you can make this really, really intricate, okay? Are there email systems where, could you implement an email system where you can also have decoupling in space? Yes, by means of a third party and mailing lists and whatnot, okay? But don't screw up my example. It's more important that you see the distinction between these two. Yes?
Other example of coupling and decoupling is time the synchronous and asynchronous communication.
So I just had a discussion about why I'm not going to use that to explain it, and it's very simple. I'm not going to talk about synchronous or asynchronous communication because that is actually subject to a rather nasty definition. I will come back to synchronous and asynchronous later. Okay? Intuitively, I would say yes, but I like the definition much more when you say that the communicating parties have to be active, up and running at the same time, which is not the same as synchronous or asynchronous. Yes?
An example of decoupling in space would be maybe a centralized distributed system where with one master node, and if one slave node wants to send a message to another slave node, it doesn't need the address of it, just sends to the master distributes to the rest over the nodes, right?
Okay, so I like the example, but it's wrong. But let me explain why, and you will agree with me. But the example is very good, actually. So the argument is, if I take a master-slave situation, and you want the slaves to communicate with each other, they can do that by means of the master, so that the slaves don't have to know each other. Okay? And then you could say that is a decoupling in space. That's your argument, right? And what I'll say is that no, but that is an implementation of how you can decouple in space two slaves. And that's a subtle difference. Because no matter what, the slave will have to communicate to the master, and it will have to know the address of the master. Okay? So why did I think the example was good? How would you implement a system that is decoupled in space? Well, an obvious one is that you use a centralized broker to which you send all the messages, even not necessarily knowing its address, but just do a broadcast, picks it up, does the matching, forwards it. But that's the implementation. Do you see the subtle difference? So the model is at the conceptual level, and in the end, let's face it, you can only implement all this stuff using standard communication technology, which means sockets. Okay, socket communication, which is very much coupled in time and space. Yes?
Websites are coupled.
What's it?
Websites.
Websites are
Coupled, yeah. A person browsing the website.
Statements or time.
Because that,
let's vote. I talked to a website. Okay, that's your example. Coupled in time, coupled in space? So basically, there are now 4 votes. What do you want us to vote on? Coupled in time?
well, it's definitely decoupled in time.
It's definitely decoupled in time. Let's vote. Who says that when I'm browsing the web and I contact the web server, that's your situation, right? That I have a decoupling in time. Who says yes? So decoupling in time means not synchronous, asynchronous, but means that the 2 communicating parties coupled in time, I want to give the positive definition, coupled in time means that the 2 communicating parties have to be up and running at the same time. Is talking to a website being coupled in time or decoupled in time? Who says coupled in time? Who says decoupled in time?
Well, the person
You're alone. Oh no, 2. Oh, shit. You're both alone. You want to give an answer?
Yeah, the problem is it doesn't necessarily have to be, and it's not transparent to the client if it is coupled in space or if it's not coupled in time or if it's not coupled. Because if you have like transparent proxy in between and the web server goes off, you just get on the proxy.
Was not the question.
Good answer. Security. Okay.
But the person who is putting the information out there doesn't have to.
Hold it. Okay. Now let's follow a couple of lines. So there's some interesting stuff going on here. So I like your answer for the following reason. You're saying, Martin, will you be a bit more accurate to whom you're talking to? Okay? And what you're saying is that if you're looking at cached information and your server or your site is actually the thing that was out there, then your argument is I can say that you're decoupled in time because it's really not necessary because you're talking to a cache. Okay? I would say that's correct, but that's not what I intended. Okay? Even then, I would say the cache is part of the site, or I could say I'm just talking to the cache and I will have to have this coupling in time. Okay? And then, we could say, well, if it's yes or no, but it doesn't matter. We have the situation in focus. I think that's more important. You're talking about something completely different, which is, the reasoning is okay, but you're not talking about the decoupling in time between the client and the website. You're talking about decoupling in time of the client and the producer of the website. And then the answer is yes. Okay? In general.
Then it's decoupled in space also, because I don't have to know the address to give the.
You're right. And it's also decoupled in space because I definitely do not need to know the address of the content producer. That's a good reasoning. My conclusion is you understand the difference. Okay? More importantly, it's very important that you understand the distinction between the two. Is it clear? Okay, good. Then let's move on. Whoops, that's the wrong direction. We're over here. Decentralized architectures. They're much more fun, actually. So in decentralized architectures, you talk about peer-to-peer stuff. And you all know about peer-to-peer stuff. Right? Who dares to say no? Good. I didn't, not what? What?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between distributed, centralized, and decentralized? Because
I will be able to give a much better answer to this question, which I like, by the way, when we're a bit down the road. Okay? It's a very difficult question, actually. And at a certain point when I will be saying that the best solutions in these distributed systems are often centralized, that's when you have to come up with this question again, okay? And I mean it, by the way. So if there are any folks over here saying, distributed and decentralized, that's the way to go, here I am. I've been doing research in this area for I don't know how long. Actually, I even have a reputation in this system, a scientific reputation, and here I'm telling you the centralized solutions, they really are good, okay? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't concentrate on distributed systems because they're everywhere. So keep that question in mind, okay? I want to talk about peer-to-peer systems. So there's a difference between structured, unstructured, and hybrid peer-to-peer systems, but I'm going to first concentrate on structured versus unstructured. In a structured peer-to-peer system, the nodes are organized according to a specific distributed data structure. I will be explaining that in just a minute. The cool thing about a structured peer-to-peer system is that what you're really doing is you take a nice, elegant, symmetric data structure and you impose that on the internet. I'll give an example of that in just a minute. And unstructured is just chaos. Okay, you just have lots of nodes and you need to get to stuff. And then you just don't know where they are. But if you have a structured data structure on top of the internet, you know the path. And this is a very important observation. We're dealing with overlay networks. Okay? The concept of an overlay network is extremely important in distributed systems. When you talk about the internet, you talk about routers that basically allow you to pass messages from router to router to router and then to the end systems, okay? In an overlay structure, you build a network on top of a network. And it comes very close to something like a virtual network. Basically, you're telling like, this is a process, part of my distributed system. There's another process over there. And despite the fact that that process over there is at the other side of the world, I will maintain a TCP connection to that guy. Okay? And if I get a message from that guy over there, then I will know how to forward it to that guy over there. So that's an overlay, independent of what you see in the actual internet. Okay? And logically, this means that that process over there is actually my neighbor, but implementation-wise, the messages that I send to my neighbor may have to cross the entire internet. That's an effect of an overlay network. So you need to keep the concept of an overlay network in mind, and you have to make sure that you understand what it is. Are overlay networks static? No way. I'll give some examples of that in just a minute. Okay? I'm deviating a bit from the book. Like I said, I'm improving I'm changing the material in the book, and I believe that I'm improving it. And I thought that the explanation of peer-to-peer networks was just not appropriate. And I'm moving, it's not incorrect, but it should be placed somewhere else. Here's a good example of a very naive, structured peer-to-peer network. It's a hypercube. Okay? Now, what makes this thing work? It's an overlay network. Okay, so that's clear. In this case, it's a hypercube, and I just have these 16 nodes. And what I do in an overlay network, freeze that thing. In an overlay network, I say, okay, that node can contact that node, can contact that node, etc., according to a fixed scheme. Which means that if I need to look up things, I will have to implement a lookup function that takes a key, I'll explain the notion of a key in just a minute, and based on that key will forward that lookup request to the node responsible for that key. Okay? This is what happens in many structured peer-to-peer systems. Why a key? Well, a key is associated with a bunch of data, a file, a movie that you want to download. Okay, got it? And you need to find out which node is actually storing that movie. And when I'll be talking about BitTorrent, parts of that movie. So you take a key, and you need to now find a node responsible for that key. And responsible means storing the file associated with that key. And once you've found that node, you say, hey, give me the file. That's how structured peer-to-peer systems work. Notably, the structured peer-to-peer systems that are used for file storage. Is this stuff used? Yes. Amazon makes use of it. One of the things with, and not only Amazon, you actually have this on the internet. When I talk about BitTorrents, hey, we're back into the structured peer-to-peer systems. The nasty thing about structured peer-to-peer systems is if you want to make them... So what will be a problem with structured peer-to-peer systems? Security. And the fact is, it is a problem. I had one PhD student who thought, hey, let's try to make a secure peer-to-peer system. And we ended up writing a survey paper consisting of 55 pages explaining why, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to make a structured peer-to-peer system secure. And then we went off to do other things. And it's just an extremely nasty thing. So does that mean that you never see structured peer-to-peer systems? No, you do. You see them a lot within a single organization, within a single security domain. Okay? But when they're out there in the wild, they are generally not that structured because they can actually be relatively easily torn down. That this is not being done, Cadelmi is one of a good example of a structured peer-to-peer system, says a lot about how well people actually, of how much people like these things. Okay? But is this idea of a structured peer-to-peer system clear? We'll be discussing much more nastier examples when I get to, I think, chapter 5. And we'll be discussing real peer-to-peer systems. Okay. What? DNS? The domain name system. I like this question. Question number A. Is DNS a peer-to-peer system?
No.
Let's vote. Who says yes? Who says no? Okay. Who wants to argue why it's a no?
I think it's a layered architecture style because the main servers communicate the updates to the let's say slave servers.
Okay. Any other arguments why it's not?
Peer-to-peer is more like a cloud of equal nodes, while DNS is a layered server approach which trickles down their data.
Okay.
Well, I think in peer-to-peer you have to be a server and a client at the same time, or you can at least switch, and specifically DNS you can switch. You're either the server or the client.
Okay.
You know the DNS address server in advance. Every IPS vendor has its own list of domain name servers.
Okay. So all these arguments are good. Okay. Structured peer-to-peer systems, nodes are organized following a specific distributed data structure. I think DNS fits that model, doesn't it? It's definitely a tree. Okay, without going into the intricacies of how DNS actually works, we'll come to that. I'm less interested. I think the question was very good. I'm less interested in a yes/no answer. So all these motivations were good, but I could actually argue that DNS is a peer-to-peer system. Okay, and then we can have a big debate or whatnot. But it's the argument, and this would be one of my arguments. No, you could argue it's a peer-to-peer system. Is it a symmetric peer-to-peer system? No. I would argue against that. It's a hierarchical, organized peer-to-peer system. I think that would fly. Okay? It's certainly not a centralized peer-to-peer, a centralized distributed system. It's also not decentralized. Well, maybe it's hybrid. Well, it's certainly not unstructured. Okay? The reasoning is more important. Yes?
Could you then argue that every client server is a structured peer-to-peer?
Yeah, I know. I was, you could. So let's not get into that shit, okay? Let's start looking at unstructured peer-to-peer systems. Now, the unstructured peer-to-peer systems are again overlay networks, but they appear to be a random overlay networks. So for the folks who actually took class in graph theory, and for those who didn't, this is going to come as a surprise. But here at the VU, there's this teacher who teaches graph theory in the first year. He talks about random overlays, random networks. Happens to be me. And now you see why. Okay? Because in fact, that kind of theoretical mathematical stuff is extremely relevant for understanding what is actually happening out today in distributed systems. Namely, lots of unstructured peer-to-peer systems. And the basic idea of an unstructured peer-to-peer system is that indeed the nodes are organized in what is known as a random overlay. Technically that means that there's a link with a certain probability between two nodes. It's a logical link. But from the outside it's just like, oh my god, this is chaos. Now that's an unstructured peer-to-peer system. Okay? And it's a kind of a simple definition. But the important observation and the contrast with a structured peer-to-peer system is that if you want to look for something, you got yourself a problem. Because you do not know what the structure is of your peer-to-peer system, because it's random. So the best thing you can do is go look for stuff, not by means of a lookup function that deterministically routes your message to the node associated with a key. But the best you can do is blast away. Okay, you do a broadcast. That's one thing. And this actually happens, in Gnutella systems. You all know Gnutella systems. LimeWire. It was taken down, but now you have variants of that. What's it called now? No, Kazaa was structured. LimeWire was basically the Gnutella implementation, but it was taken down, and then you had What? FrostWire. That was the one I was looking for. Have you ever heard about FrostWire? Well, has not you heard about FrostWire? You know what to do. I'm very serious about this. Go out there this evening, hunt FrostWire, install it on your system, and see how it works. Okay? Practice is really just around the corner. This is the way how. I'm not talking bullshit here. I mean, it's not theory. People have implemented this stuff. Okay? Yes? Well, because you are linked to others. Yes. Okay. Yeah, let's not get into that. Okay? But it's a good question. Ask yourself how this is done in DNS. What? You? Yeah, so you get an address of a well-known server, for example. It could be on your local network or whatever, and that's how you get in. It works exactly the same over here.
But it's still somewhat centralized then.
There's a set. Yes. Okay, I'll just say yes. You're right. It is centralized. There is no completely decentralized system for the simple reason that it will be impossible to join. Okay, but once you join, it's very decentralized. Okay, so what you can do is you do flooding to actually get your stuff. Okay, now strangely enough, this is how FrostWire works and all Gnutella derivatives. But you can also do a random walk, and it's really like looking for. I still have 10 minutes at least. Eh?
I think there's a proxy here. Somebody told me that's all.
It's beer time. Stay. But you can also do a random walk, and random walks are very efficient, strangely enough, under a certain assumption. A random walk means I don't have it. Let me ask my neighbor. Oh, you don't have it. Ask your neighbor. You really take a random walk through your network, and if it's too slow, you start 2 random walks. Okay? Now, the random walk will not work when you do not have replicated data, because then it's really looking for a needle in a haystack. Again, think of just hundreds of thousands of computers organized in an unstructured peer-to-peer network, and you've got to find that single computer that has that specific file. A random walk is not going to fly. I hope that's obvious, right? But in many cases, as I argued last time, what you do in a distributed system is you replicate like hell. And you all know how well this works for audio and video files. No, right? These things are not modified. They're produced once and read really often, okay? So you replicate this stuff, and when you massively replicate, and you take into account what the replication degree is, you can apply very basic math to see how successful a random walk can be. And in many cases, it's extremely successful. And this is the reason why FrostWire really works very, very well, because you only have to contact a few nodes, although FrostWire uses flooding actually. But if it were to use random walks, you only have to contact a few nodes to get what you're looking for. And what you see in practice is that these 2 techniques are combined often. You flood, you set out an initial request, and from there you do a random walk. And you can do all kinds of basic math to actually see how it works. Okay?
Would an example be like the World Wide Web used to be before Google started indexing it?
Just a minute before everybody really wants to start drinking beer. Before Google.
Before Google started indexing websites or Alta Vista, whatever it was, there were websites and they were per domain. But inside the domain, let's say .com, it was just a bunch of websites. And in order to find any information published by one of them, like bees or whatever you're interested in, you have to rely on other types of word of mouth.
Yeah. I kind of like the example. You could argue that the web before, not even Google, before that we had Alta Vista, that kind of stuff, that to a large extent was an unstructured peer-to-peer system, for the simple reason that you hadn't the faintest clue what the structure was. So indeed you needed another kind of communication channel to be able to find your stuff. I think I would buy that. There are better examples of unstructured peer-to-peer networks, but I like the example. Okay. The interesting ones, there's one thing that is also very common in so-called super peer networks. They combine things. What you do is you install a number of super peers, for example, for indexing. And basically these guys are used to make it easier to actually find your stuff in an unstructured peer-to-peer system. What's the canonical example of an unstructured peer-to-peer system using super peers? Skype. Thank you, Skype. Skype is the best example. And the super peers change. Okay? If you're on Skype for a very long time, not only do you get charged twice, I noticed this today, it just popped up, but that's not relevant. But if you're up and running for a long time, you get promoted to a super peer. Okay? And basically it's helping indexing, but also punching holes in firewalls. I had another example. Does anybody know? Oh, yes. There's another example that was actually just mentioned. Who talked about Kazaa? Kazaa is actually a combination of structured and unstructured, but it mainly relies on its super peer network, so to say. Yes?
Could one argue that the internet is kind of like a super peer-based network because you have like autonomous systems and then you have internet exchange points that implement route servers, which are in that case kind of the super peers of the network?
Okay, I'll repeat your question to see if I understood it well. Could you actually argue that the whole internet is one big super peer network and then the autonomous systems form the nodes? And I would say, I could easily say yes, because what is actually a peer-to-peer network? But I'm going to say no, for the simple reason that, at least from a distributed systems perspective, I do find this concept of an overlay network important. And that is dropped when you talk about the internet, maybe to a certain extent, actually. Well, define the internet. I knew you were going to ask this. I'll say, yes, you're right, and then... because, we need a couple of beers to actually have this debate. But, again, it's not the yes-no that's interesting. You could argue, justifiably, that it's a peer-to-peer network. I would buy it. And I'm serious on that. These are vague definitions, and it's more important that you understand the concept. Yes?
May not be decentralized, but in normal multiplayer online games, is it use super peers?
Multiplayer online games, are these super peer networks or not? They can or they cannot. I must say, I never play games. My kids are now 13 and 16, and I finally come in a phase that they're not asking their dad to play a game anymore. I just hate games, and I know nothing about online games, even from a technical point of view. But there are online games that are implemented as peer-to-peer networks. My understanding, and there are definitely people here in this room who know much more about this, is that most online games actually have a very strong centralized structure, for the simple reason that otherwise it's so difficult to get the synchronization correct.
But when, for example, you're in an area which you don't have to know about people who are somewhere else.
Yeah, so if you would ask me, can you implement online games in a peer-to-peer fashion, I would instantly say yes, without even knowing all the ins and outs of online games, but for reasons you just mentioned. There's a very strong sense of locality in games, and you can make use of that for distributed or decentralized implementations.
So basically those are the matchmakers.
Okay.
They act as super peer.
Okay, there you have it. So basically, indexing, matchmaking, that's a very good example, actually. Those are the typical roles you would assign to super peers. Okay? Before everybody wants to go really away, let me see. I want to talk about two hybrid structures. This is a boring one, and the other one is BitTorrent, and I want to explain BitTorrent. So I'm going to take 5 more minutes of your time, but then at least you'll know how BitTorrent works. Okay, that's a reward, I think. Here's one that is used a lot. Content delivery networks. Content delivery networks use a combination of client-server with peer-to-peer. And what I'll be explaining at length, I think tomorrow actually, tomorrow, is that if you take a look at the overall structure of the internet, you can talk about edge servers. The edge servers are the servers placed at ISPs that we as clients actually contact. And if you take a look at content delivery networks like Akamai, they actually rent server space from ISPs. And they just have an interesting business model, and then they push content to these servers in order to make the performance okay for their clients, but also to ensure things like stability, being able to handle flash crowds, those kind of things, okay? But the interesting thing is the edge servers together form a kind of a peer-to-peer structure, but there's definitely a main server over there, so you could argue, hey, this is a combination of peer-to-peer with client-server. And actually you could argue that it's unstructured or structured, or it's not even an overlay, all these things also, but clearly a combination of client-server with something decentralized. I think I have to be very careful what I'm saying over here. I wanted to explain this one. How many of you actually do know how BitTorrent works? Oh. How many of you ever thought that you knew how BitTorrent works? Okay, that's all a bit. How many of you have actually wondered how BitTorrent works? Okay, that at least gives me some motivation to explain this. Okay. BitTorrent is actually very simple. Let me first explain an old-fashioned version of BitTorrent. Because when you go to, not of course the Pirate Bay, but Proxy Pirate, whatever, okay, then you see magnet links, right? Hey, I may be older, but I'm not stupid. Let me first tell you how it used to be implemented. Okay? And how it used to be implemented is basically on this scheme. You're a client, you access the web, and you, really in the old days, you went to a site where there was, a BitTorrent web page. Just basically an index file. If you want to have this, you go to that, okay? And I'll explain what that is in just a minute. Now you just type in Google, okay? Or you go to the Pirate Bay or one of its proxies, say, okay, this is what I'm looking for, and then basically you get back, you go to Google. That's the thing on the left, okay? And then, to a certain extent, the thing that comes after that, the file server, that is basically a server that holds so-called .torrent files. You could argue that the Pirate Bay is that type of file server, okay? And this is the reason why the Pirate Bay got punished, because, hey, guys, what are you doing? You're selling content. No, we're not. We just have pointers to content. Okay, that didn't fly entirely. So, but the important thing is the .torrent file. What is a .torrent file? Now we get, so far as client server, right? We're following a very traditional path. Now we get to the tracker. What's in a torrent file? And a torrent file has a pointer to a so-called tracker. And a tracker is nothing else but a broker. Still, we're talking in the client-server world over here. And now comes the interesting part. How does BitTorrent work? Imagine you are a producer. You have a file. And you have a popular file. And you really want to distribute this over 1,000 clients. Okay? Now, in a completely client-server system, what you would need to do is to distribute that file 1,000 times to each of these different clients. That's not what you want to do. Okay, that means 1,000 TCP connections, a lot of bandwidth, but that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is say, listen, I just want to basically upload this once and have all these people who are interested in this file start, getting bits and pieces of each other. So what I do is, I'll just take now a simple example. If I have 2 clients, I chop my file into 2. Into odd pieces and even pieces. Okay? Block numbers, whatever you want to call them. And what I do is, to one client, I say, here are the odd pieces. To the other one, I say, here are the even pieces, even numbered pieces, I should say. And, go to each other to fetch the other ones. So if you have the odd pieces, here's someone who has the even pieces. Leave me alone. Okay? This is what a tracker does. What a tracker says, I will tell you who's out there, and I will give you information on who has what. Okay? So what a tracker does is negotiate, no. Moderate, no. Broker, yes. Who's supposed to be in this swarm of downloaders, and it will provide you information on, go to that guy over there, because he probably has the file chunks that you're looking for. And this is now the unique thing about BitTorrent. It says, okay, hi, let's say you have a file chunk that I need. Then how do I get that file chunk? Well, I need to have a file chunk that I can give to you. And strictly speaking, we will do an exchange, but of course we'll not exchange. I will give you a copy of the file chunk, and you will give me a copy of the file chunk that I want. And now we're into business. What happens after an exchange is that both of us are happy. We each got more of missing pieces. Got it? And this is how BitTorrent works. And the tracker plays an important role because it says, okay, go look over there, go look over there, join the swarm. So it keeps track of downloaders. If your tracker is down, you can do a bit of downloading, but it will come to a grinding halt. Yes?
How does the tracker come up to date?
That's a very good question. You actually contact the tracker. Okay, so you always send also information to the tracker on where you are. I'm not going into all kinds of details, but basically you have this big swarm that's a potential class of downloaders, okay? And the tracker just groups things, and then you are in your small world. And then you actually send status information to the tracker on how far you are. Everybody does this. So the tracker always has information on where the file chunks are, and it doesn't even have to be accurate. It will give you hints on where to go. Yes?
So the more seeder file has from leacher,
Yes? Okay, so a leecher is one who has file chunks but not the incomplete file. And a seeder is a node who has the complete file. and continues to hand out chunks. The seeder is an altruistic process because it has no need to hand out chunks because, hey, it has the complete file. Okay, yes?
The bigger the tracker file would be. Because it keeps the information of all these people.
The tracker has more work to do depending on where you are in the download and...
It's not a torrent file.
No, the torrent file tells you where the tracker is. Okay? And it keeps some other statistical information, hashes and whatnot. Yes?
I don't think the tracker actually knows which peers have which chunks.
Well, it has to know at a certain point where a downloader is, right?
I think it only knows how far along it is, and just a number.
Let me think.
And it knows which peers still need file.
Yeah, okay, you're right. So, okay, you're absolutely right. It doesn't have a complete, up-to-date administration of what's going on. Basically, it has hints of how far a downloader is.
And you have to
Yeah.
exchange the peer
Okay, so this is very important information that you actually gave for the following reason. You all have used BitTorrent one way or the other. And what you'll notice is that it's difficult to start. Okay? Once you're there, whoa, you're blatantly fast, especially with popular files, and let's say even with a single seeder. And things slow down towards the end. For the reasons you mentioned, the tracker does not have complete information, can only hint at what to contact. So the tracker is responsible for making these subswarms, so to say.
But if the tracker goes down, there's no problem. Because the peers actually know how to finish
Not always. It all kind of depends. It is kind of nice if the tracker is up. Okay? It helps. But the important observation is you get hints on who to contact, and it's often very stable. And you get into trouble when you have almost all the file and you're just missing this one piece of chunk. Who has it? Okay? And not only that, you have to find someone who has not everything, but can come to you to actually find this thing. So that's one problem. And the start is also a problem because you start with nothing. So you have nothing to trade. Okay? Now that's where BitTorrent says, okay, give this guy a break. Okay? Give him a chunk for free. That at least gives you something to trade. That's the reason why the start is slow. We actually did measurements on this. You can model this. The middle part is really fast, and then there's a slow part at the end. Now this is how it used to work. You know what a magnet link is? You all heard about a magnet link, right? And why don't you know what it is? You know, it's kind of a strange question, but what you should do when studying this course, when you go out on the internet and you go to the BitTorrent stuff and you see these things like magnet link, actually this is how I did it. I said, oh, it's a DHT. DHT? What are these guys doing? Okay? Now this is a typical question that you guys should also have. How does this work? Are these guys lying through their teeth? Well, actually they're not. Okay? So magnet links are nothing else but pointers to node, a pointer to a node that will get you into a structured peer-to-peer system where you can then be, continued from there on. So the whole traditional .torrent stuff is distributed in a peer-to-peer system. And then you can come to the question, how do you actually get into this peer-to-peer system? Well, the site you're visiting must be a member of that, because otherwise it would be impossible. If you would have a fully decentralized system, you would have a bootstraps problem. Okay? Now, that piece of information you will not find in all documentation of magnet links. But hey, it has to be that way. Okay? So this is what I encourage you to do. For example, taking this and say, but this is not how it works. But you can find out by simple reasoning at least 90% of the functionality of any modern BitTorrent system. And you don't need me to tell you. You can find out for yourself. And if you do that, you will actually notice that you can get a very deep understanding of what's going on. And that at certain points I can fill in some of the details, and in some cases some other person here in the room can fill in the details, because for specific topics I know for sure that there are people in this room who know more about the topic than I do. And I'm not ashamed of that, but if you have the feeling that you do know more, let me know. I will let you take over for that part. Okay? Tomorrow we continue with chapter 2.